Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Verenia, and in today's video I want to talk about some budgeting mistakes that I think you might be doing. Now, the reason why I wanted to actually make this video is because I know that a lot of people really want to start making a budget, or maybe they've been budgeting for a while, but for some reason things just tend to go wrong and it's really difficult for people to actually stick to their budget. So what I want to talk about in this video is really outline some of the mistakes I'm seeing when it comes to actually budgeting your money. Now, as a quick reminder, I am still currently doing some weekly YouTube lives, which are pretty much like mini trainings, really focusing on the areas of budgeting, saving money, and also investing your money as well. So definitely check out some of those YouTube lives, because I did do a specific one really focusing on how you can actually start sticking to your budget, especially if that's something that you're struggling with. So make sure you do check those videos out, and make sure you join me on my last YouTube live that is going to be happening at the end of January on Sunday, 7:30 p.m. GMT. So I hope to see you there, and of course I will link the other lives in the description below for you. But now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about some mistakes that you may be making when it comes to your budget. So the first mistake that you may be making when it comes to your budget is the fact that you focus too much on the budgeting method. Now guys, I'm not gonna lie, this is probably one of the biggest mistakes I see, and it's so funny because we get so hung up on the budgeting method. And when I'm talking about the budgeting method, I'm basically talking about the different ways that you could budget your money. So for example, this could be the cash envelope system, where you pretty much have envelopes for separate categories and you're going to be using physical cash to pay for those expenses. It could also be the zero-based budget method, where you're pretty much just giving every penny or cent a name, or it could even just be the 50-30-20 rule, where 50% is going to go towards your essential bills, 30% may go towards your spending, and then 20% may go towards your savings. Now, if you do want information on some of the different budgeting methods you can use, then definitely check out my video where I talk about that in a bit more detail. I will link that up here for you and in the description below. But the reason why I'm making this point is because I see so many of us just getting so hung up on the budgeting method that they end up basically going into analysis paralysis. And so what happens is that they don't even end up taking action. So rather than just trying one budgeting method and seeing how it works for you, what you're basically doing is overwhelming yourself with the different budgeting methods there are, because I'm not going to lie, there are a lot of budgeting methods, but what you're doing is, instead of taking action, you're pretty much overwhelming yourself with all of this information, and it's going to get to the point where you don't even end up using a budgeting method because you're now stuck into that analysis paralysis. Okay, so should I do the cash envelope system, or do I do the zero-based budget? But what about the 80-20 rule? What about the 50-30-20 rule? What if one doesn't work? And so because you haven't actually taken the time to test any of these strategies to see which one works for you, because you're too busy being confused with what strategy you should use, what ends up happening is that number one, you either don't use any of the different strategies at all and you don't end up having a budget that works for you, or number two, you end up trying so many different ones at so many different times that you end up getting overwhelmed again and you end up getting really confused, and then you keep asking yourself, you know, why am I not able to stick to my budget? So the reason why that now becomes a problem is because you're not focusing on the right things. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a budgeting method or that budgeting methods don't matter, because I use a budgeting method, but what I'm saying is the mistake that you're making is just getting too hung up on that method. And so what I tell my coaching clients is, I honestly do not care what budgeting method you use. What you just want to figure out is what budgeting method is going to work for you based on your own personal circumstance. So yes, for you it may be the cash envelope system, but for someone else it may be the zero-based budget method. It honestly doesn't matter. What you need to do is just make a decision and pick one, test it and see if it works for you. If it doesn't, then fine, just move over to the next one. And if it does, well then great, you've pretty much got a method that works for you and you just need to continue doing it. So again, picking your budgeting method is great and it doesn't need to be difficult. Just make sure you're not so hung up on actually making the decision in terms of what method you're actually going to choose. And if you're liking this video so far, then feel free to give me a thumbs up, as it really does help to support the channel. Plus, I'm sure you know, it's free. So the next budgeting mistake that I tend to see is the fact that people don't necessarily know what they're actually budgeting for. Now, you might be asking, Auntie V, what on earth do you mean? What I'm trying to say is that most people don't actually understand why they're budgeting in the first place. For a lot of people, the biggest thing in their head is just the fact that they should have a budget. So they don't actually know why they should have a budget in the first place, but because someone has told them to have a budget, they should therefore just have a budget and then that's it. When in reality, if you don't even know why you're budgeting in the first place, well then what's actually the point in doing it. And so with most people, the common misconception I see is that they think that the budget is there to tell them what to do. And so what that means is that the budget is there to restrict them. And so what you need to really understand is what that budget is for and why you actually have a budget, because that's probably what's going to help you keep you motivated and want to go back to your budget if you actually understand what it's for in the first place. Now, if you want to learn more about why people are actually struggling when it comes to budgeting and even saving money, and particularly not understanding their why, then definitely check out my free training, because I go through this in so much more detail and I really walk you through what you actually should be doing when it comes to budgeting and saving your money, as well as actually managing your money in general and investing your money too. So definitely check out that free training if you haven't already. I will of course link that up here for you and in the description below. But essentially, if you don't actually understand why you're budgeting and you don't really understand the concept of budgeting, or you don't actually understand the reason why budgeting can help you build wealth and actually help you reach your financial goals, well then there's going to be no point in budgeting, because you're not even going to end up looking forward to budgeting every week or month, and most likely you won't even want to stick to that budget either. So if you really want to figure out how you can make your budget work for you, then understanding your why is probably going to be one of the biggest shifts. Now, the next budgeting mistake that you might be making is pretty much linked to the first point, but it's the fact that you might be obsessing over how you're going to make the budget over what's going to be included in the budget. So what I mean by this is, again, many people really don't focus on the important things when it comes to budgeting. So rather than actually thinking what's going to be included in your budget, so for example, rather than thinking about your essential bills or your savings or your investments or how you're going to be spending your money, you are more so focused on what the budget should actually look like. Okay, do I do the pen and paper or do I do the spreadsheet? Where do I even keep it? What color should I use? And so because you've now spent all of this energy thinking about what the budget should look like or where it should be held, or all of these unnecessary things that really just don't matter very much, what you're essentially doing is just making the process so much more time consuming, and the longer you take to figure those things out, the more you're probably going to end up being more resentful for it, because you're now going to be thinking that budgeting just takes way too long. And so rather than actually spending the time or energy to do the budget itself, because you've just focused on doing all of these extra things, you're probably less likely to actually make the budget or maybe even stick to it as well. Again, when it comes to your budgeting, just make a decision and go with it, because you can always test and adapt as you go along. So the sixth mistake that you might be making when it comes to your budget is just being too unrealistic. Now, what I mean by this is, I'm not even going to lie to you, some of you guys are just budgeting unrealistic amounts, particularly when it comes to your spending. So for example, if it comes to your food budget and realistically you spend about 100 a week, but you're trying to budget 25 a week for your food budget, knowing full well you're probably going to end up spending 100, well then that's going to be totally unrealistic. And so why that's a key mistake is because if you now keep doing all of these unrealistic amounts when it comes to your budget, what's going to happen is every single time you now start to look at your spending, all you're going to be seeing is the fact that you've basically gone over your budget every single time, and so you're probably going to be a lot more discouraged, and then you might find that you just give up on budgeting altogether. And so what I'm really trying to stress is that yes, the budget can be a really useful tool to give you that reality check, but if you're already setting unrealistic amounts and you know full well that you're not going to end up sticking to that amount, well then you've really just defeated the purpose. Now, if you want to learn more about how you can actually maybe budget your money and be a bit more realistic when it comes to your budget, then definitely check out my video, particularly if you are very new to budgeting, so that you can also avoid this mistake. I will of course link that up here for you and in the description below. Plus remember, I do have a lot more budgeting videos and also my own monthly or weekly budgeting template too, so definitely check them out. I will link those in the description below for you as well. But what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to your budget, really try to make that more realistic, because the more realistic you make it, the more you're likely to stick to it, and then you can now improve on certain areas if you really need to. So the next budgeting mistake that you might be doing is only tracking your expenses. Now, being aware, I'm not saying that tracking your expenses is wrong. It can be very, very helpful. But what I mean is that if you're only tracking your expenses and you're not actually doing anything about it, well then you have defeated the purpose of actually tracking your expenses and budgeting in general. Now, why I'm saying this is because one of my coaching clients found that she was always overspending and she didn't understand why it was so difficult to budget. And the reason why it was quite difficult is because she wasn't actually making a budget in the first place. What she was doing is just tracking her expenses. And so what I mean by this is, at the end of the month, what she would be doing is looking through her spending and seeing that she spent money here and there and everywhere, but then she wouldn't do anything about that the next month. And so what she wasn't doing was actually planning her expenses for the following month. All she'd been doing is just looking through her spending, but not actually evaluating it. And so if you actually want better results when it comes to budgeting, you really want to be thinking about doing both. Yes, you can be tracking your expenses and seeing how you actually spent your money, but the more important part is the fact that you need to be able to understand where you want your money to go, and that is going to be by planning your expenses first. Now, if actually setting the budget or planning out your expenses or understanding the difference between planning and tracking your expenses is a bit overwhelming to you, then definitely check out my one-to-one coaching program, because essentially what we'll do is make sure you understand the difference so that you can be able to budget your money effectively and be able to stick to your budget without feeling so restricted or guilty all the time. So definitely check out my one-to-one coaching program if you haven't already. And if you are interested, you can of course book a free interest call with me too. So I will link more information up here for you and in the description below. But essentially what I'm trying to say is that tracking your expenses is only going to be one part of the budgeting process. If you do really want great results, you need to be able to actually tell your money where to go first, and then evaluating how you actually did with your budget by tracking it later on. So if you did like this video, then please do give me a thumbs up if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments, what other budgeting mistakes have you made in the past? I do post every Tuesday and Friday, so if you would like to know more, then of course you can subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys on Tuesday.